Tensions between Europe and the United States. Is the Transatlantic alliance under threat? And what is Germany's role in defining its future? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Europe and the United States have enjoyed a close political, trade and military relationship that has endured for decades. But since Donald Trump took office as US president, there is concern on both sides of the Atlantic that things are changing. Trump has criticized Europe for not paying enough to cover its defense as part of the NATO alliance. And he hammered that point home when addressing European leaders at NATO headquarters in Brussels last month.
23 of the 28 member nations are still not paying what they should be paying and what they are supposed to be paying for their defense. This is not fair to the people and taxpayers of the United States. And many of these nations owe massive amounts of money from past years.
And just days after attending the G7 summit in Italy, Trump announced he was pulling the United States out of the Paris Climate Agreement. Plus, he's been critical of Germany on its trade relationship with the United States. All of this led German Chancellor Angela Merkel to openly question the reliability of America as a European ally when she addressed supporters at a political rally in Munich.
We Europeans truly have to take our fate into our own hands. Our friendship with the US, the UK, our good neighborhood with Russia, as well as other countries, this counts, of course. But we should know we have to fight for our own future, for our own destiny, and I would like to do this together with you.
So, what does all this mean for the future of the Transatlantic alliance that's been rock solid for so long? And will Germany's Chancellor take a more active role in defining a future for Europe that is less reliant on the United States? Joining me now to discuss this important issue here in the studio is Martin Ganslmeier. He is the Washington Bureau Chief for the German radio network ARD. Joining us from Providence, Rhode Island, is Vladimir Golstein. He's an analyst on Russian foreign policy, and he's the professor of Slavic Studies at Brown University. And also with us is Volker. He is a former U.S. ambassador to NATO and a leading expert on U.S. foreign policy. Welcome to all of you to the show. Martin, let me start with you. Well, as I said, things are not the way they used to be in the relationship between the United States and Germany. Let's start with some of the comments made by German Chancellor Angela Merkel that Europe can no longer rely on its old allies. That was a reference to the United States. And in fact, just in the past few hours, the German Chancellor, marking the 70th anniversary of the Marshall Plan, remarked that the U.S. embrace of open markets in post-World War II Europe served America's own interests. She says that there now should be shared values, balancing interests, and creating a win-win situation. So, if we use the words of the German news magazine Der Spiegel, are we at a turning point right now?
It could be a turning point, but I would not read too much into Chancellor Merkel's beer tent speech. We should not forget there is an election campaign going on in Germany right now. And we remember in 2005, basically, the German Chancellor Schröder won the election because he was against the Iraq War. So it always kind of pays in Germany if you kind of have some anti-American tones. I would not read too much into it, but you're right. I mean, the beginning of the relationship between Chancellor Merkel and US President Donald Trump was not very good. And for Germans, it's really irritating why America suddenly is so much against free trade, because America basically taught us to be open to the world, to be pro-free trade.
Is there a danger, Martin, that America could introduce import controls? That would affect Germany, wouldn't it?
That's a big, big fear. I mean, the one thing that Germany was really shocked about was that Donald Trump basically left the Paris Climate Accord. Chancellor Merkel really tried hard to convince him not to do that. And the second next shocker could be if America really introduces something like an import tax that would punish German exports pretty much. I think that would also hurt the relationship.
Okay, Ambassador Volker, last month the German foreign minister criticized President Trump, saying that his actions have weakened the West, and he accused the United States of, quote, standing against the interests of the European Union. Those are very strong words, a strong statement there. Is this alliance, this transatlantic alliance, under threat?
I don't see that at all. And I agree with Martin that we have to look at this in context. He's representing the Social Democratic Party in Germany. They're hoping to do better in this election than they have in the past, and it's not looking like that's going to happen. And so I think the Social Democratic Party is putting out a little bit tougher rhetoric as they get into this, and it's important for the Chancellor to show that she's no pushover. And moreover, for her to be staking out a position, as she did, that is very pro-European. And at a time when you have Macron winning election in France, I think it's actually a very good thing. And I think we have to look at this in context of saying this is actually a good trend that we're seeing in Europe right now. I wouldn't get too distracted about the comments about Trump one way or the other. Then when you look at NATO particularly, you've had from Vice President Pence, from Secretary Tillerson, from Secretary Mattis, from President Trump himself in his meetings with at the White House with Secretary General Stoltenberg, with the Romanian president, his meetings at NATO. You have a very strong commitment to NATO, strong, including Article 5, and you have a push on European allies to spend more on defense, something that every American president has pushed on for as long as I can remember, and a desire to see NATO reform and modernize to deal with modern threats and challenges, including terrorism. This is all very mainstream. So I know there's a lot of reactions to the personality of Donald Trump, but when you get beyond that and look at what's happening, it's pretty standard fare. Okay,
Vladimir Golstein, are we reading too much into this? Is there a breakdown, maybe a strain in the relationship, or is this, as Martin said, a lot to do with the election that's coming up in Germany?
Well, I would say the answer is both. What Donald Trump and the relationship between Chancellor Merkel and Donald Trump represent, I think, is a symptom. And the symptom, you know, some confident physicians can say, okay, let's forget about the symptom. It will cure itself. But the disease is much more serious. And I would address the whole issue of United States' role in the, you know, post-Cold War world, post-Soviet world. What's going on, as you know, Martin addressed it. You know, the United States, on the one hand, promotes globalism, free trade, and everything. However, it also wants to exclude from this global picture big, giant countries like Russia, like China, and so on. So what Germany is kind of, you know, torn apart because they do want to trade. They do want to sort of have the goods going between, you know, Germany to Russia to China. This is like global world. Global world has to do with, you know, climate. How can you address it only within the Europe? So this is a big issue. United States somehow still exists in this, you know, Cold War world, trying to contain Soviet Union, which is no longer there, contain imaginary enemy in Russia. And that's why it keeps on pushing this issue, and Germany is is in a schizophrenic situation. They don't know what to do, how to behave, because by very location in the center of Europe, by very location as a bridge between Western Europe, Russia, China, right. It has to trade. It has to be in the middle.
Okay. Martin, when Germans hear President Trump talk about America first, is there concern?
They are concerned, definitely. Actually, his inauguration speech came as a shock to many Germans because we knew about it in the election campaign, but many Germans thought once he is in the White House, once he's in office, he will be wise enough to basically continue the traditional approach of American politics. And so I think that came as a shock that he really means what he says. On the other hand, most Germans also know that Donald Trump is not America, and there is still a lot of Americans that probably don't agree with that. So I think especially Chancellor Merkel, who is staunchly transatlantic, who is very much pro-America, I think she's still hoping that eventually she's going to get on a better footing with Donald Trump and maybe can avoid such huge conflicts that have happened in the beginning.
What are your thoughts on that, Ambassador? Because if we take something like the Paris Climate Accord, Chancellor Merkel, the other members of the G7, tried very hard to persuade Donald Trump to stay in that agreement. Yeah. He pulled out. It was, what, 7 against 1? Yeah.
Well, it's a lot more than 7 if you count everyone who is committed still to the Paris Climate Accord. But you have to look at that in a context of domestic politics. Just as we talked about Chancellor Merkel and Gabriel, the foreign minister, in the context of German domestic politics. Donald Trump is acting in the context of U.S. domestic politics, where there is a perception in his voting base that the United States has not been treated fairly, and so he's looking to redress that. So when he says America first, what he's saying is we're going to be engaged, we're going to be internationalist, we're not going to be isolationist, but we're going to make sure we get a good deal for the United States. That's part of it. And then second, relating that to climate in particular, there's a perception that the U.S. was making commitments and paying into a fund for reducing greenhouse gases, where these are all voluntary commitments by other nations. Some countries, including China, for example, don't actually have to take any reductions for a significant period of time, and that this is another example of the U.S. taking on too big a burden. When you look at this as a matter of practicality, the United States has been on a long-term trend of reducing its greenhouse gas emissions, both as an aggregate number and also as a ratio compared to GDP. So greenhouse gas emissions per economic output has also been falling. That trend is going to continue whether the U.S. remains part of this Paris Climate Accord or now that we won't be. These are driven by factors in the economy where renewables are making headway in the economy. They are proving themselves to be increasingly economical. We're switching away from coal to natural gas, which is cleaner. So as much as the symbolism of this is one that people react to, so, oh, the U.S. is pulling out of a big agreement, the reality of the climate performance is going to be about the same.
But isn't the symbolism important in this relationship? People look at these things, the optics, perceptions.
Well, that's just it. And President Trump is choosing the symbolism that is important to his voters, as opposed to the symbolism that is important to other countries around the world.
Right. Vladimir, if you are sitting in the Kremlin right now, you are Vladimir Putin, and you're looking at what looks like a rift between the United States and Europe, you can't be displeased with that, can you?
Well, maybe on some simple tactical level, one cannot be displeased. But all in all, I think Russians were hoping with the new, president of the United States, there'll be a push for better cooperation, for kind of decreasing the tension, for bringing the trade and bringing sort of cooperation everywhere. So all in all, Russians, I don't think they're very happy. They invested a lot of money into this Nord Stream project, trading gas to Germany. Out of the blue, United States throws a wrench into that. So it might be a pressure between, it might be tension between Europe and United States, but nobody benefits from that, honestly. Neither Russia nor China, which probably wants to trade with everyone. So maybe on some kind of nearsighted, myopic level, somebody said, okay, good that these guys are fighting. But all in all, nobody benefits from that, and Putin understands it pretty well.
Martin, when Chancellor Merkel talks about being less reliant on the United States, when she says that it can no longer rely on its old allies, does she have a point? Because if we look at Europe right now, it faces many challenges. Britain negotiating its exit from the European Union. There's, of course, the climate change thing as well. There have been terror attacks, multiple terror attacks. So, in a sense, does Europe need to do things on its own right now?
I think what she really meant was that it's time now that Europe really behaves like a grown-up, which I absolutely agree. So, of course, she was disappointed about Donald Trump's leaving the Paris Climate Accord. On the other hand, I think right now there is a mood in Europe that is much better than even like half a year ago. Half a year ago, everybody was afraid there might be election victory of Le Pen, or the Dutch election. People were afraid. Now Macron is very pro-European. He's very pro-Germany, German-French relationship. There's a new spirit of let's bring the European Union to the next level. So maybe the election victory of Donald Trump, as shocking as it was for many Europeans in the beginning, has something good that Europeans suddenly see, okay, we have to do it on our own. But it's not so much against America. I want to really emphasize that, especially Chancellor Merkel. She definitely wants to stay close ties with America. But yes, Europe has to do more. We have to do the next step. Also with NATO, I mean, we have to pay more for the defense. That's definitely one thing that Donald Trump is right. He shouldn't have said it on this celebratory speech. I mean, he was very blunt. That was kind of tough to hear. I mean, the message is right, but he could have brought it in different wordings.
Okay, we are going to have to take a break.